Hello and welcome to The Booking Club, the podcast that brings you today's leading authors and commentators from a table at their favourite places to eat and drink. I'm Jack Haldane and we're talking adaptations again on this episode, this time from page to screen. My next guest is the acclaimed writer Lawrence Osborne, novelist and author of The Ballad of a Small Player, now a star-studded thriller on Netflix. My next guest and I are cocooned in the basement dwelling of the restaurant that he has chosen to come and speak about, well, a novel that was written over 10 years ago, in fact, but which has since been adapted to screen through Netflix. That restaurant is Defune. It is the first Japanese restaurant, I believe, ever to be established in London, London's longest running. And my author is the acclaimed serial novelist, Mr. Lawrence Osborne. The book that I mentioned is called The Ballad of a Small Player. It takes place in Macau and follows the rather precarious Lord Doyle, played by Colin Farrell in the movie. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you, Lawrence, to the Booking Club.
Thank you for having me.
Why did you choose Defune?
Well, it's my local, because whenever I'm in London, I usually stay at Manchester Street Hotel, which is up the street. And so it's there are a lot of very good restaurants within about a half-mile radius of this place. That's like Trishna, which I love, on Blandford Street. You know, there's Fisher's, there's all these sort of places that I like. But this place is always very quiet and very intimate. And it's very Japanese in a way that it's quite hard to find Japanese food in London, actually. I live in Bangkok, where Japanese food is absolutely everywhere. And, you know, and I go to Tokyo, of course, all the time because my son is married there. We're married to somebody from there. So I come here for a bit of repose and a bit of refuge.
If I put my head to the side, almost touching the wall, and look down past your shoulder, it does feel like we've frozen a moment in time where a high-speed train is in motion.
Isn't it? It's amazing.
It's crazy.
It's like a sort of it's like a passage in the underground, only clean.
Quite. And we're the only ones in the basement currently. There may be other clientele going to join us soon, but they made this space for us very kindly here. So we are really under the auspices of wonderful Japanese hospitality. You have your sake, we have some sparkling water here. And
perfect.
I loved the adaptation of The Ballad of a Small Player, but I loved the novel more. The novel, as I say, was published in, I think, 2014. I'm not normally so enamored with the title of a novel as to linger on it, but The Ballad of a Small Player is one I take pleasure in saying out loud. It's so elegant.
I can't remember how I came up with the title specifically, but when I was in Macau and sort of playing the tables, because I used to sort of go there and, for jaunts and to sometimes do visa runs, but, you know, I would go alone at midnight down to the floors of the Hotel Lisboa, because they gave me very good rate at the rooms at the top. This is back in the day when it was cheap.
The same Hotel Lisboa that appears in the novel.
Yeah, and which now no one goes to because it's considered too old and untrendy, and all the big new ones are kind of where all the Chinese go. But back in the day, back then, 20 years ago, the Lisboa was the game in town. And anyway, I used to go down the escalators in my sort of cheap velvet jacket, which I got made in the basement. And I sit at a table, and I'd always notice across the room some guy, some lost guy, some Chinese salaryman sitting by himself forlornly at a table, gradually losing. And I just thought, this is a place of small players who can never win. And of course, you know, later I did a piece with the American press about Wynn and about the big American casinos. And I was taken into the back rooms, and it was explained to me why you could never win. They're just algorithms that operate. And so everybody's really a small player in those places, because you have to lose over the long run. Even if you're a VIP, you go to the VIP rooms and you're a high roller, even the high rollers have the illusion of winning. But mathematically, they can't win. I mean, mathematically, over the duration, you're going to lose. And so you're kind of turned into a small player, inevitably. I think that's how the phrase came to mind, you know.
As you say, the house always wins, which suggests even the most skilled gambler must have to live under some kind of delusion to partake.
And that's in games that involve skill, which Baccarat doesn't. I mean, Baccarat Punta Blanca is a skillless game.
Which is Lord Doyle, the protagonist's favorite choice.
The Chinese like that game because it's what they would call an I Ching game. It's a game of chance. I mean, there's absolutely no skill involved. So basically, you're kind of released into the stream of fortune and misfortune. And it's very therapeutic in that way because there's nothing you can do. You can't determine the outcomes. Supernatural forces determine the outcomes. And I was very interested in, even though I'm not a gambler myself, by the way, I mean, I'm not an inveterate gambler. I'm not an addicted gambler at all. I was just observing money in play in the most money-orientated society on the planet, which is China. The Chinese at New Year don't say Happy New Year. They say, may you be rich. Happy doesn't come into it.
As we were discussing outside the restaurant, I lived in China for 3 years. I was passed Hongbao as an employee as a thank you for my year's work. I understand how money is used as a sort of a ceremonial gesture of appreciation. Yeah. But you would say that China is a more money-obsessed culture even than America?
America is like a Salvation Army by comparison. I mean, it's absurd. It's not a particularly materialistic culture at all. I mean, people think it is because they don't know. Well, they think that because they don't know China. They don't have no experience of how raw and intense money is in the Chinese context.
I suppose you're right. In different ways, these two cultures worship money. One with a sort of evangelical verve that connects to a sense of the salvation of the striving soul. Another that is purely down to the brutality of fortune, which has no real ability to be manipulated by hard work.
And the latter is China. The former, the American attitude towards materialism seems quite quaint and naive when you come from China. It just seems like, it's not as ruthless or as cold, and I think that comes from the Chinese attitudes towards the supernatural. And I noticed in Lisboa straight away. So I noticed two things. First of all, in the gaming tables, there are these vertical boards which show the direction of I Ching. So, as I might call it, but, so the numbers change according to winds, like supernatural winds that are blowing around the tables. And when the wind is blowing favorably for a player, the numbers on the board reflect that. They suddenly change. And then groups appear around the tables, drawn by the magnetism of good fortune, which is just a sort of, digital chimera, just these numbers that keep flicking and changing. And the center just in the lobby was that Stanley Ho, the builder of the casino and the founder of gambling in Macau, former gunrunner, during the war. This guy had filled the lobby with these enormous jade, statues of Guan Yin, the goddess of fortune. And Guan Yin is the female version of the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, which is a male deity in India, but in Mahayana Buddhism becomes female. And goddess of fortune, mercy, sailors, and of course gamblers. And here you have these sort of huge, and I noticed that gamblers would pause, linger quite a bit by these statues before going in or leaving. So the whole thing lent a completely different, when you compare it to Vegas, where it's very two-dimensional.
I was about to ask whether you'd compared the culture around luck in Vegas with Macau.
Vegas is the most depressing place on the planet. I mean, I can't stand that. I spent a lot of time in Vegas when I was living in the US. Again, out of curiosity, because I think the way that money impacts people and the way people internalize the mysticism of money has always interested me as a subject of stories, even long before I was writing fiction, because I came to fiction very late. And similarly with Macau, I mean, I didn't go to Macau to research a novel. I went to Macau first, then wrote a novel about it. Many, many years later. This is what attracted me in the first place. I was just humanly fascinated by it. How does this machine tick? And how do you write about money?
I don't want to stand between us and the food we've just ordered, which has just arrived and looks beautiful.
Yes, it does.
Do you mind describing to me what you've ordered?
So you ordered some udon and some tempura. I ordered some agedashi tofu, and I ordered some sunonomo, which is like basically it's like vegetables, spinach, seaweed and shrimp, little crab claws maybe in vinegar. A little bit of sake is like
medicinal, eh?
Yeah.
To all you hardworking small business owners out there, if you're tired of feeling invisible online, there's a solution to that. Total Solutions. It's your modern-day Yellow Pages. You could be a service provider looking for more clients or someone simply searching for the right pro to get the job done. Either way, Total Solutions connects local businesses with local people. The platform has now surpassed 100 signups, and you can upload videos and pics of your services. So if you're seriously ready to grow your business, head to totalsolutions.com and join the community. That's totalsolutions with a Z.com. Well, we are back, but we are not finished. On to the adaptation. Obviously, we'll return to the story, the plot, the themes. But what I wanted to know is how it came about, really. When did you first get the call, the email, the interest?
I was on the jury of the Macau Film Festival in 2017 with the great Chinese actress Joan Chen and Laurent Conté, the French filmmaker. And a couple of and we were on this jury looking at all these films, obviously. And the director of the festival at that time was Mike Goodrich, who has subsequently become one of Edward Berger's main producers. And now my partner in Java Road, the company that we have now. So Mike, but at the time I didn't know Mike. We just had met. He invited me because of the book, I think. So I was thrust into the world of Chinese cinema and red carpet things, where I was, even more unrecognizable than anybody else there.
Wow. Have you seen many Chinese films out of interest?
Oh God, yeah, of course.
What's your favorite?
Zhang Yimou, I think, is like fantastic. I mean, To Live is one of the greatest films ever made, I think. Raise the Red Lantern, all those people.
Yes.
Jie Zhangke, I think, is fantastic. Touch of Evil.
Do you like Beijing Bicycle? You ever seen that?
Yeah, that was fantastic.
They're wonderful films and so slept on.
Yeah, and then there's people like Ang Lee who are from outside of China now, but you see a film like Lust Caution, which is set in Shanghai in the 30s. Amazing film. It's Ang Lee's best film, It's almost like him returning to his roots in a way, produced his most powerful film, But then you have Hong Kong cinema, which is a totally different thing. But I'm a great fan of Johnny To, and and it was great to see. And Wong Kar-wai, obviously, as Anthony Kwong is actually in the movie, which is hilarious. And I was thrilled that he plays the stern manager who gives Doyle a lot of hard time, but he's such an iconic actor in Hong Kong, and nobody talked about him in the film, which I thought was a disservice to him actually, because I think he's in Election 1, Election 2, those great Johnny films, and he's such an extraordinary guy. I mean, his father's American, his father's Chinese. So he's a complete, he's a sort of half guy. Has this amazing faith and is known from those gangster films, very serious gangster films, the greatest gangster films ever made, really. Johnny To. I mean, so there he was, popping up on the screen, right? And, he's even in the role, in the very small part he has in Ballad of a Small Player. He is incredibly menacing and formidable. There's such an incredible presence he has. And then you have actresses like Deanie Ip, who are very famous from Hong Kong TV, and Josh. I think it was great that they included some people from, and then Fala Chen, of course, who's I think she's mainland Chinese. She's in America now.
You saw a screening, the gala screening of The Ballad of a Small Player.
Last Thursday.
What did you think?
Well, it's very rare that I go to cinemas these days because, like most people, I watch on other devices, on computer or whatever. So it's rare that I see cinema as they ought to be seen on big screens. And I don't particularly go to cinemas in Bangkok, where I live, because it's usually just contemporary Hollywood stuff that I don't really care about that much, So it was kind of extraordinary for me to be in this Royal Festival Hall with a huge audience, many hundreds of people. I mean, it's a big event,
Did you feel self-conscious?
No, because nobody knows who I am. So writers are invisible now, so it's great. By the way,
you were saying, as a novelist, how can you not be interested in how film works? It just doesn't go the other way around.
It does not. No, it does not. And people, I had to do the red carpet and get photographed and all that. And it was quite funny to see all these people clicking away manically, but had any idea who I was, But that to me is a blessing, because anonymity is the greatest thing that you can have as a human being in this time that we live in. Especially in a time when literally millions of people are pseudo-famous from social media. So I really couldn't care less. So I sat in that huge auditorium thinking, it's weird. It's my story, and yet nobody would know who. It's just everyone else is focused on something else, some other people.
When it came to casting this, bearing in mind that the idea to adapt it to screen came quite some time ago, 8 years ago, how has that changed? The cast must have been very different.
I mean, the thing with a film is you have to get a script first, and then you cast. So basically, we had to get a script in order. Berger was interested at the time. He was known at the time for Patrick Melrose, the TV series from Edward St. Aubyn. So, that was what he was known for. He hadn't done All Quiet on the Western Front. He hadn't done Conclave. So he wasn't in the same place career-wise. He hadn't made these big films,
Such similarities between his adaptation of Edward St. Aubyn and this novel.
I think so. I think one of the things that critics have mistakenly harped on is the difference between Ballad and Conclave. But, it's a totally different, not totally different actually. It's a different kind of film. It's a different kind of story. But directors never stand still. They always want to do something different. And each film has to be judged independently, not in the light of the previous one. If he had made Ballad of a Small Player just after Patrick Melrose, it would have been too similar, I think. He wouldn't have been bouncing off a wall. He would have been just continuing the same vein. Even though Ballad is totally different aesthetically because it's a pop opera and it's balls to the wall and it's very, very over the top. And
you know this about it now, having seen it, but were you prepared for that?
No, all I had was a few reviews from the United States, which I read, which were rather sort of dour and sort of, disdainful in some respects. Not all, but some, in this very sort of puritanical way, And I thought it was going to be, not what it was. When you see it, you realize it's much more emotionally serious than, one might have expected. And, I was pleased to see. Also, the pacing of the film, the quiet bits in the film, the bits when they're on that little house cabin on the lake, not the lake, on the sea, in Lamma Island, a place I know very, very well. That evoked that place very eerily and, in this, when there's it's all creaking and kind of sound of water and, it's very much like Lamma is. Lamma's a mysterious island, and I used to hang out there a lot. So for me, it's very moving to see it recreated. And I think Colin really liked it out there as well. That was actually a very sort of special place and not what you think of when it comes to Hong Kong, Anyone I know who's lived on Hong Kong was very pleased to see it on the screen, as I was.
Yeah.
It's a kind of like, these are places that you've never seen on screen before. They're just not shown,
How much of this movie, or what elements of it, hung on your approval? Did you have any
Nothing
say in
at
the
all.
cast?
No, look, it's Netflix. I mean, you're not doing approval. I mean, they couldn't. Netflix is Netflix. I mean, it doesn't come into it at all. Which, in a way, is kind of lets me off the hook because sometimes it does depend on approval. But Netflix is a different kind of products. I think the mistake that writers make, and why they're often very scornful about their screen adaptations, if they're lucky enough to have that, is that the film never conforms not just to their book,
right,
but to their idea of what the film ought to be. And this is a terrible mistake to make because a director is a creative person and must make their own work that has nothing to do. I mean, I would always say to anyone adapting a book of mine, forget the book. Just make your film. Don't worry about it. I mean, I'm not stressed at all about whether it deviates or it's ridiculous to look at it that way. So what if it deviates? When you read Traven, Treasure of the Sierra Madre, and you compare it to Huston's film or the way, Humphrey Bogart plays that part, you realize that it's connected, it's cognate, but it's not the same, and it ought not to be the same. Otherwise, it wouldn't be alive.
So was there anything about this adaptation that disappointed you?
No, actually, because, I think, again, to continue the same point, it's Edward's film, so what would I be disappointed in? You know what I mean? It's its own thing.
You really were able to separate entirely.
But I'm used to it now. I know that's how it works. And directors have egos as well, and they want to make their own piece. It's not, when we say adaptation, it's not like they're enslaved to what you've written. That would be ridiculous and inappropriate because actually, I've given them the book to adapt with their understanding in mind. I mean, it's going to happen anyway. They're going to, but no, I actually felt that they were quite faithful to the book in many ways. It's a very difficult book to film.
One adaptation from a novel to the screen that has clearly gotten a lot of attention of late and probably will do come award season next year is One Battle After Another.
I haven't seen it yet, actually.
A lot of people who have read the novel Vineland by Thomas Pynchon feel inclined to criticize its deviation. And again, I think what you've expressed there is that novelists who get involved in the film industry have to understand where one ends and the other begins and really let the creativity of the director fly.
I mean, it really kind of depends on the circumstance. When The Forgiven, my first novel, was filmed in Morocco by John Michael McDonough, there was a scene in the film where Ralph Fiennes and Jessica Chastain are kind of walking up this stairwell in the middle of the Casbah in Tangier, and they cordoned off the entire Casbah, and hundreds of people came on the roofs to look down at this scene with these two actors, speaking dialogue as they came up the thing. And I was at the top of the stairs along with 100 other people, all the crew. And I was watching them and thinking, how weird this is, that it's like, this is a scene that I obviously wrote in the book. And it's quite a sort of intense scene because the dialogue, I remember writing that dialogue during a snowstorm in Brooklyn after breaking up with a girlfriend. And it was quite a bitter dialogue, It was quite fun. But then lo and behold, Jessica Chastain is sort of uttering those same words straight from the book. And I almost moved to tears. It was like this tremendous emotional moment.
And you really relive it in that moment.
Yeah, and it's years and years in the past and you've forgotten about it. But then I thought, it's actually such a kind of, it was such a beautiful thing to see it transposed by other people who didn't know that backstory. And it's funny enough, like Jessica came up to me afterwards and said, that dialogue, that scene, who was this woman? So I had to tell her the whole backstory. And in the novel, she's a children's book writer, and it's actually just somebody was involved with. But, I hadn't really done it that much on purpose. It was just sort of there. It was human material and whatever. But she was very curious to know why it was like that. It had a feel of something that it wasn't just entirely made up, And this is why my attitude to the film versions is, I think, philosophically distant, but at the same time, it can be very intense in certain moments. Similarly with Ballad, when I'm looking at, Lord Doyle is very autobiographical, and it's a first-person book. It's a very autobiographical book. Obviously, much more extreme than anything I would have been, but still, it's still. I'm also Irish, Anglo-Irish. My mother was Irish.
Yeah.
Doyle's an Irish name.
It was the obvious question to ask, but I recall one interview that you did about 10 years ago where you asked the audience not to ask you about gambling, which I took to mean, don't try and pin this story on me. Please don't try and make me Lord Doyle.
Yeah, you're right. I tried to not make it autobiographical, but no one's ever... I rarely talk about that or make it, but I think all books are autobiographical, frankly.
Well, yes.
They have to be.
Yeah.
But this one especially, because it really is kind of like, I wrote it in Macau in a sort of, in straitened circumstances, and it had a kind of feverish quality. I wouldn't bear to read it now. I just can't, I can't go near it.
Oh, well, that's a shame, because I was going to ask you to read an excerpt later.
You can read it.
We're not going to get it. Well, you know what? I might just do that.
Yeah.
Drawing our attention to the sushi here, which of these sushi pieces are your favorite?
I thought the tuna, actually, tuna was great. I usually don't like maki that much. I always find it quite sort of nondescript. But this is very carefully done, very beautiful. The rice is very beautiful. Yeah, and I think the surinoma is outstanding.
Excellent.
Especially the octopus, which is really good.
The screenplay is full of suspense, as one can imagine from the conversation we've had about it so far, especially when Lord Doyle is placing big bets at the baccarat table. Interestingly, the book doesn't treat these moments as the source of its suspense. Lord Doyle wins big and loses even bigger, but you write about it quite matter-of-factly before moving the reader on. The real suspense comes through in other ways. Did you suspect before the adaptation took form that employment of suspense was clearly going to differ on screen versus on the page?
I think it has to differ. I'm dealing with interior moods in the novel, and that's, of course, a thing that you can do in the novel which you can't do in film. And there are things in film that you can't do in the novel, by the way, as well. Film more accurately mimics the way we intuitively understand other human beings because we work with surfaces. We see human beings, we don't have any access to their inner lives. Never. We just go on action and words, So it's very like, film is very like real life, for that sake. And I mean that in a profound sense. Because as human beings, we operate through intuition and assumptions based on those things. So that's how you operate in the world. The convention of a novel of having interior dialogue is completely artificial. I mean, it's a 19th century convention, basically, that we invent for the purposes of the novel. But in a first-person novel, of course, the suspense comes from the voice and the modulations in the voice and what the voice is going through. Can't do that. You can't really do that in film.
That interior monologue may well be old, but it's not obsolete.
No, not at all. Because we do have, as well as the fact that we operate by interpreting other people objectively and on the surfaces, but we ourselves have internal monologues. So we have our whole life is an internal monologue, which is absurd when you think about it. I mean, death is when the internal monologue stops. Paul Bowles has this great moment where, nearing death, the character looks in the mirror and says, well, so long, old chap, we won't be seeing each other anymore. And it's very much like the inner monologue is like that too. So the first person in the novel works for that reason. We recognize it. We recognize voice. And of course, the voice in this book is very personal. It's very close to the way I was feeling at the time. It's not the way I feel now. I'm a different person now. But 20 years ago, that was how I felt. And in the moment of writing the book, which is very feverish and very... That's why I wouldn't want to read it now.
You were feeling feverish then?
I was in a feverish state.
Self-destructive?
Yeah, and I think, a lot of things going on, but I was much younger and much older. I'm very interested in desperation in people and characters. I mean, desperation is one of those things that all human beings experience. Well, maybe Mark Zuckerberg doesn't, but most of us go through desperation.
I think he feels it. I just think he lets it out in other ways by creating casinos in our hands.
Yeah, exactly. No, but I mean, I think we have desperation, but our desperation is primarily about money. Most of the human race goes through the desperation of money. And it's acquired desperation or allowed desperation or it's suicide or it can be about other things, jilted lovers and, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, you go back to Mark Zuckerberg. How did Facebook get started?
Well, that's right. Okay, for sure. First world desperation, I'd say. But I live in a country where desperation, people throw themselves off buildings because they can't pay their electricity bill, stuff like that. In fact, I saw a friend of mine on Facebook today showed me a terrible story about an old German guy who's blind living with a female taxi driver who was, doing her little taxi rounds and they were just surviving. They were just, getting by. And she got involved in a minor traffic accident. And the guy whose car she scraped demanded 40,000 baht, which is about $1,200 from her as compensation. And she threw herself off a bridge because she couldn't pay it, leaving the German guy, a blind guy, alone with no one to feed him. And people came in and had to rescue him and so on. But you see those stories in Bangkok quite a lot, It's terrifying.
And from China, clearly.
Let me tell you a story from the shoot in Macau last year when we were in the Wynn Palace, which is this luxurious, beautiful casino hotel. And it was great. We were there for 3 days, 3 nights. Well, after I left, apparently a money changer or a currency trader working the casino floors from Hong Kong was murdered in the suite right next to mine or on the same floor by two of his clients from the mainland who they were trading money with him, trading currency with him, and they knifed him to death in the suite, a horrific orgy of blood, and stole all the money that was in his apartment, in his suite, and fled with 2 blood-dripping suitcases to the border where they were arrested. They were promptly arrested and probably given the death penalty. I don't know. But they were just desperate, apparently, because of debts, desperate enough to kill somebody in the same hotel I was staying. That's also Macau. It has this dark underbelly of desperation. And, of course, casinos are places of desperation, famously. And in the film, you see the scene where the body flies down past the window, and it's some guy who's thrown himself off the top floor. That's something that happens all the time there. Well, I shouldn't say all the time, but I mean, it does happen from time to time. So desperation as a state, when you have it yourself, is something that you have to master. You can't let it get on top of you So you're in a state of struggle with this, knowing that this little demon you're struggling with can kill you, can end you. Desperation is a life and death struggle. But of course, in characters, it's, you think Dostoevsky is the gambler, which is, of course, I'm playing off a little bit because Grandma is the same character as Grandma in the Gambler, But that's Dostoevsky, the great master of the moods of desperation.
You mentioned to me, I think earlier, that you were reading through some reviews, particularly from America, of this screen adaptation, and you said that there was a sort of a strange insistence on knowing whether or not Lord Doyle was a good person. And
gets redeemed.
And I was commenting on the fact that in the West, there's this obsession with viewing everything through the lens of a kind of Christian morality, even if we don't own up to it being Christian fundamentally. But it's interesting that they assess film like this as film, but film, as you say, presents people the way they're presented to us in everyday life. We don't get a sense of their inner monologue. So in a way, you want to ask these reviewers, well, what do you think? Because if you think that Lord Doyle is a good person or a bad person, that's as good as saying that you've met him as you would meet anybody else in life.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's probably because of gambling, the subject of gambling, which gets Anglo-Saxons really up and on. It's like, I don't know quite, it's not, the funny thing is, it's not even that I disagree with that. I mean, I'm not sure I approve of gambling, really. I mean, I'm not exactly celebrating it, am I? I mean, but yeah, I think that's true. I think they want a redemption narrative and a Hollywood narrative at the same time. And often it's very much the same thing. But this is a Chinese story,
It's not a book about addiction, is it?
Not at all.
It's effectively an Asian ghost story.
I wanted to write a ghost story about money, a supernatural story about money, because I think money has supernatural qualities in the way that it operates inside our minds and the way we treat it. I mean, the way we treat these little bits of paper is magical. It's certainly magical. And this is an interesting thing. So why not set a fable or a supernatural fable about money in the place most appropriate to that narrative desire, which would be China, because there it's an actual thing in the world. But you have to explain that. I mean, that's not the way we look at it, obviously. We still have a magical attitude towards money. But the supernatural has been stripped away from Western life and Western mentality and even from Western storytelling, where it's kind of more or less, I mean, it's still there, but it's not very convincing. Whereas you look at supernatural tales in Asian cinema, it's incredibly convincing because it's so close to the way people actually feel. I mean, I live in Thailand where people just, I think my whole attitude towards ghosts themselves have somewhat changed over the years. I've kind of, my maid is always saying to me, you can't go out today. You can't go out in the rest of the building. There's a ghost there. I just saw him. And it's matter of fact, as she's doing the ironing, Wow. And I've come over the years to actually accept that what she's saying has something to it.
Okay.
Even though intellectually I know that it doesn't. So, and everybody I know, my girlfriend's like this. I mean, she's just completely, it's completely, yes, this is all real and you have to treat it as real. If we're walking home from dinner, it'll be like, no, we can't go down this street. We have to take a detour because there's something in the street. Something in the street. And you may as well not bother asking what it is,
Well,
yeah. Another thing I noticed also in Thailand, the first time I saw an eclipse in Thailand, I looked out on all the balconies of my building, which overlooks this weird sort of jungly plot, and I noticed that all the people had come out with these little dark-skinned vegetables like eggplants and put them in these little bowls. And it was explained to me that this was in honor of Rahu, the god of the eclipse, who's eating the moon. And to appease him, you have to put dark-skinned vegetables. And this is the 21st century, So this is like something I just have kind of absorbed unconsciously over the years. I'd been there a long time, and now I'm very Asian in my attitude towards those things. I just accept it as a normal thing. When there's an eclipse, you go out and put eggplants.
You're a Western man who grew up in the UK. You now live in Thailand. Do you think that there is a fundamental difference between Western fear and Asian fear?
So I don't think anything's exotic. I mean, I'm reading accounts of the Spanish conquest of the Americas right now quite obsessively. I'm very interested in this subject matter. And it's amazing how, one set of superstitions met another set of superstitions. And there were two different kinds of fears, but they were quite similar to each other. The Aztecs and the Spanish could read each other on a certain level when it came to things like that. And I think that's true globally.
I see.
But, of course, in a secular West over the last 200 years, it's gradually fallen away. As it had in me, I'm just an average Westerner as well. I did university, I did, post-grad. I went through the whole sort of, becoming an educated person, quote unquote. And I thought moving to Thailand, I would always be impervious to all of that. But here's the thing. When you don't have to believe in things. If people around you take them as real, then there's osmosis takes place. And you begin to feel the same way. Not believe or think, feel. So it's like, and what you feel is what you feel. And what you feel is mysterious to yourself.
And when it comes to superstition, feeling is believing in a sense, isn't it?
What is it a belief in? It's like there are other interdimensionality. Things come from another dimension or another world. It's like I think this was like David Lynch's philosophy, basically. I mean, Lynch in his films was always like, I'm not telling you stories. I'm telling you how to dream. Or rather, I'm telling you what dreams are. These films are just dreams. In a dream, a stranger comes to your door, knocks on your door and says you a riddle. And he's wearing a cowboy hat. And it's like, you don't know who this person is, but it doesn't matter. He's coming out of another world. And you think of something like Twin Peaks, which explicitly deals with that. It's all about people from other dimensions and things from other dimensions. So you either deny that and say that's, all of that is tosh, which intellectually you have to. But at the same time, do you feel that it's tosh? No. And in the same way that you don't feel that David Lynch's films are false, because it doesn't matter. It's what's the fear you feel watching Lynch? It's a genuine, because I think it's the fear that Lynch
The great
had.
comfort of watching David Lynch's films is that he portrays the subconscious so authentically that you feel understood in your own dreams.
Exactly. And that's how
it makes the nightmares actually easier to deal with.
So that's how I feel about the supernatural realm in the Asian life that surrounds me. I feel like I'm in a David Lynch film. But because I feel like I'm happy to be in a David Lynch film, because that's what I want out of that place. That's why I moved there. I didn't want to be, I was in New York for a long time before that, and I felt that I was in a rational box the whole time. And it's why I couldn't write novels, I couldn't write fiction.
Yeah.
And I wanted to write books that I wasn't reading elsewhere.
Yeah.
And I wanted them to be, really fucking strange.
Yeah.
On some level. And
you felt like you were living in a noughties rom-com
Exactly.
in New York.
Whereas I wanted to be in a sort of...
You wanted to be in Twin Peaks.
I wanted to be in Twin Peaks. And Bangkok is Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
In a way it is. Or at least it enables me to not care about these other things. I mean, I just write what comes out of the feeling of that other worldness. And Ballad of Small Players like that too. And it's maybe why the film is different, because in the book, it's a very mystical book. I mean, it's like, essentially, I mean, it's a story. What is it? The guy, Doyle goes to a casino, and on the surveillance cameras, they see a ghost standing behind him, and therefore they ban him from all the casinos. Now they have that in the movie, but do people pick up on that? I think Westerners are like, oh, it's just a ghost, ha ha ha. They don't really, it doesn't have resonance. But for me, it has resonance.
Yeah.
So, but I can't say that everybody else will feel that.
When The Ballad of a Small Player was published in 2014, China was very much viewed by the West as a gigantic proactive trading partner whose perspective, I guess Western leaders believed, could be soft-powered into something resembling Western liberalism. 11 years on, those images of David Cameron pulling pints with Xi Jinping are almost laughably naive. Would you agree?
Yeah, totally naive. And I don't think it's necessarily... I think basically ultimately China is who she is, and she doesn't really care what we think one way or the other. And she is, she's not going away. She is who she is. It's a historic civilization of great amplitude and great depth. And but the idea that it was going to turn into a kind of a gigantic sort of Denmark was totally always absurd. And that's because most Westerners don't really know much about her, and, don't go there, we don't think about China that much. I mean, we have this huge embassy about to be built here by Keir Starmer, and I just think, this is like, that naivety is still around, apparently. And I don't know what the actual, financial arrangements are, but that would seem to be a somewhat rash idea. The Chinese are just taking their opportunities, I think, as any great power will. So it's not even an accusation against them particularly. It's just the way great powers operate. But you're a fool if you take it, if you don't take it seriously. And I don't think people do. They take Russia seriously because it's a familiar foe. Because we've had John le Carré, we've had the Cold War. We're used to that. But we haven't yet switched to China, a vastly bigger power. So I think China still has that sort of fatal tinge of faux exoticism, which is not the way I look at them, really.
Well, Napoleon warned us, didn't he? We've had plenty of time to understand what history has brought us to.
I mean, look, China has their own problems, and they're very considerable problems. So it's not all roses there. I mean, they have a lot of problems internally, and they're in a deflationary moment right now. So the Chinese need to get money out of the country because it's a closed capital account. So they go to places like, Singapore and Bangkok and whatnot, and they invest in real estate. But that seems to have really collapsed at this point. That tells you something.
Well, Lawrence, at your request, I'm going to spare you the task of reading from your own novel. I'm going to read it for you. Though I have taken instruction as to where in the novel I read from. And this is actually towards the climax of the novel. So, here goes. Homeless people are discouraged in Hong Kong's neat and prosperous parks, but no one came to rouse me and send me on my way. The night became mellow and easygoing, and I slept into the early hours, dreaming in my way of all the things that I didn't dare to think about. The moon rose between the gleaming and implacable towers, and in the park I opened my eyes and thought of the tropical forest that this island must once have been. An island of fig trees like these, magnificent with fruit and monstrous roots. And as I awoke slowly and almost unwillingly, I was aware of a hand placed upon my forehead, and someone sitting next to me, quietly waiting for me to rejoin the world. It was like that moment in the Intercontinental, which now seems so long ago, when I had understood finally that the supernatural is real after all. The hand was like a poultice, damp and cold, but reassuring, and the form contained neatly in its elegant silk clothes was almost material. We said nothing, and indeed, looked at from the point of view of eternity, there was nothing to say anyway. I fucking love the way that you've written this book. It's so accessible. I actually feel like giving it to some of my least novel-orientated friends because I know that they'll enjoy it, which is a stunning achievement for any novelist when they write something that can be passed to your lover of action.
Well, I think, so many novels don't have action as if it's sort of looked down upon. But I think, of course, as a novelist, you're still telling a story. You have to be. And don't kid yourself. If you don't, it's a dubious bet, I think. I mean, obviously there are novels that don't do that. Ulysses, The Man Without Qualities, Proust, and all that. Okay. But for the most part, I think, the story has a beauty just of itself. It doesn't need, to be a series of essays or digressions or whatnot. For myself, that's what I want from novels. I want them to be ergonomic, clean in a way. Do you see what I mean? I want them to move through time.
Lawrence Osborne, thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was very enjoyable. And it's always fun to talk like this, isn't it? Podcasts and radio are the greatest medium.